You are illegally and privately owned property.
Shut it. Close the shutter. Close the shutter.
The movie begins in a bleak, controlled society. A man named Izi, who was a part of this community, stepped outside his home to take a shower. As the morning unfolded, an announcement from the kitchen community's public relations blared through the air. Izi used the common bathroom in the building, which was made for everyone who lives in the building. As he is showering, impatient neighbors pounded on the bathroom door, eager for their turn. Izi, ignoring the poundings, kept washing unbothered. Not far away, a white van came to a halt as a gang of bikers intercepted it. One of them, Kamali, climbed inside the van. With a face mask on, he turned to the driver and calmly informed him that it wasn't personal, he just needed what was inside. Once finished with his shower, Izi went out of the bathroom. The person who was standing there complained about him taking time, but Izi walked past them and got into his house. While there, he stood before a mirror, brushing his teeth while browsing real estate listings. A notification popped up reminding him he had 21 days to secure a private residence. He chose the pay later plan without hesitation. Meanwhile, the bikers returned to their territory with the stolen van, cracking open the package inside. It was filled with food, which they distributed among their struggling community, the kitchen. The kitchen is a neglected neighborhood where the lower class fights daily for survival. The government had completely abandoned them because they refused to give up their space for other buildings. At work, Izi sat with a couple, walking them through the details of burial arrangements. He was employed by Life After Life, a funeral service offering an alternative to traditional burials. Those unable to afford a proper grave could have their deceased turned into trees, allowing families to visit until the time came to plant them. Izi explained the procedure, but the husband seemed uninterested in the idea. He told his wife he didn't want to be a bush, but his wife wanted him to hear more. Izi asked his colleague to show them around. His colleague took the wife to show her around, but Izi called for the husband. They stood there in private. Izi asked if he was from the kitchen, and the man confirmed. Izi then started sharing his own experience. He started telling him of his father's passing and the overwhelming costs that came with it. He told him how exaggerated the funeral was. The story struck a chord, and after a moment's hesitation, the man agreed to the service. Later, Izi recounted his conversation with the couple to a coworker, explaining how he had persuaded them. His coworker admired his persuasion skill, and Izi told him the commission can't make itself, and he must work for it. Shifting the topic, he admitted his growing concern about being forced out of the shared house he lived in. He was working on securing a private place, but wasn't sure if he'd manage in time. After this, Izi checked for the current funeral that is going on, and recognized the person, so he went to where the funeral is being held. When he reached there, a woman was laid to rest. The only person who was attending the funeral is her 12-year-old son, Benji. Benji walked into his mother to say some words while their digital photo was floating around them. He sat next to her body, but he was unable to say anything. The woman who was leading the funeral showed him as the procedure began. His mother's body is turned into a plant. Benji put the plant with the other plants. The woman told him to visit her as much as he could. After the ceremony, Benji remained seated, waiting. When Izi eventually stepped outside, Benji approached and asked if he had known his mother. Initially, Izi denied any connection, but after a pause, he admitted they had met years ago. Benji kept asking, but Izi told him there was nothing more. Benji then told him his father was supposed to come, and Izi told him that it looked like he hadn't. Preparing to leave, Izi climbed onto his bike, but Benji blocked his path, asking for a ride. Izi turned him down and rode away. Benji looked at Izi leave and sat there alone. After a brief hesitation, Izi circled back and agreed to take the boy where he needed to go. When they arrived at a place where Benji lived, he got off the bike. Before leaving, Benji asked where Izi lived. Izi simply answered the kitchen. Hearing this, Benji revealed that his mother had once told him that his father lived in the kitchen too. Without responding to that, Izi told him that he should leave now, so Benji headed inside. Benji walked into his house and got in. The house was dark, the power long gone. Using a flashlight, Benji found his way and sat. At the same time, Izi is riding his motor to the kitchen. After a while, Benji searched the room until he came across a gift. He started doing a countdown, and after he was done, he went to the gift and unwrapped it. It is a bicycle, which was a gift from his mother. Without wasting time, he took it outside and set off toward the kitchen. Upon arrival, he started asking if anyone knew Izi, but no one recognized the name. Frustrated, he leaned against a wall, trying to figure out his next move. That's when 3 men approached him. One of them, Staples, ordered the others to check him for anything valuable, but they found nothing. When one of them approached his bike, Benji pushed him away and told him he could not touch his bike. Staples was amazed by his bravery. Instead of letting him go or attacking him, Staples asked for his name and told him to come with them. Without much choice, Benji hopped on his bike and followed as they led him deeper into the kitchen. They took him to their house and Staples introduced him to the others in the house. Staples then asked one of them to show Benji the sleeping quarters, so Benji went upstairs with the man. Once left alone, he lay down quietly, tears slipping down his face. Elsewhere, Izi lay awake in his bed, unable to rest. He got up and sat on his bed, contemplating his move. At sunrise, the kitchen community stirred as an announcement echoed through the speakers. Izi went to the bathroom to wash, but there is no water. Staples walked into Benji and woke him up. He got up and started getting ready to go out with the gang. At the same time, Izi is also getting ready to go to work. The gang took Benji to the rooftop. When they reached there, they spotted a drone hovering above, its camera aimed directly at them. Determined to take it down, they armed themselves with a large slingshot, but each attempt missed. The drone continued capturing footage. When Staples asked Benji to shoot at it, he refused, but they convinced him to do so. Staples handed Benji the slingshot, and with a well-aimed strike, he knocked the drone from the sky. The group erupted in cheers. Izi came to the kitchen and sat in a crowded cafe. The waitress served him water, and Izi sat scrolling on his phone looking at properties. Later, while walking down the street, Izi noticed Benji with the gang and called him over. Benji assured the gang he'd be back and went to speak with him. He mentioned searching for Izi the day before, but now he told him it doesn't matter, and started walking away. Izi called behind him and warned him about getting too close to the gang. Their conversation was cut short when the police suddenly swarmed the area. Panic spread as people scattered, fleeing toward their homes. The police started announcing that they had illegally occupied private property and they must evacuate. Izi and Benji ran towards Izi's house and they got inside before getting caught. Benji opened the shutter and peeked into the hallway. Those caught were mercilessly beaten. Izi ordered Benji to close the shutter. Once calm, Izi made it clear that Benji needed to distance himself from the gang. Benji told him that he would only stop hanging out with the gang if he let him stay with him, but Izi refused. But Benji, with nowhere else to go, laid out his options. It was either Staples or Izi. Hesitating, Izi finally agreed to let him stay, but only for 2 days, telling him he is also getting out of this place soon. He then hands him a bag and a towel, telling him to use them as a pillow and a blanket. Benji pointed out the inconvenient living arrangement. At that moment, Lord Kitchener, the voice of the kitchen, spoke through the PR system. His message was clear. The police crackdown was a punishment for refusing to be driven from their homes. He urged the community to resist and stand their ground. After this, Izi told Benji he was going to work and walked into the door. Benji called from behind and asked Izi to check if his mother is okay. He asked him to make sure she was getting enough water and sun. Hearing this, Izi told Benji they were going together and left the house. As they walked in the hallway, they saw the community cleaning after the police raid. Benji looked at the debris, shocked by the damage that the police had caused. Some of the community members are crying, hurt by the damage. Izi and Benji reached life after life. While standing outside, Izi coached Benji on how to speak with clients, using his mother's case as an example. Benji struggled to memorize what he was supposed to say, and Izi made him repeat it again and again, but Benji couldn't get it straight. They walked inside nonetheless. Inside, Izi talked with potential customers. He then took them to Benji and introduced them. Benji hesitated, struggling to recall what he was supposed to say, but instead of following a script, he spoke from the heart, and that was enough to convince them. As they walked home after work, Benji brought up a question about what happened to the trees created from the burial service. Izi dodged the topic, telling him that he didn't have to know that. Benji told him he was legally forced to tell him about that, but Izi, instead of answering, started complimenting Benji on his performance that day. To celebrate, they headed to a skate alley. Izi asked Benji what he wanted to do, but Benji told him he just wanted to watch. They sat on the stairs looking at people dancing with rollerblades. Izi handed Benji a rollerblade and told him to get on the stage. Benji put on skates and took the stage, dancing. At first he fell, prompting Izi to make fun of him. Benji then got up and started dancing with ease. Izi stands there looking at Benji. At that time, Jace arrived, surprised to see Izi engaging with the locals. At that time, Benji came and asked Izi to join him, but Izi didn't want to dance. When Benji went back to the stage, Izi and Jess went to the bar to drink. After skating, Benji sat alone, bored. He then saw Staples and walked towards him. After greetings, Benji stood by the pool table and noticed a girl who was sitting there. Meanwhile, Jace confronted Izi, bringing up Benji's mother. He claimed to know which Tony had been buried at Life After Life and pressed for details about Benji. Izi, however, kept his answers vague and told him they worked for a funeral service and it was a normal thing for people to come there to use their services. Jess is not convinced about this explanation, but Izi didn't offer more. He just turned to the bartender and asked for a drink. Benji approached the girl he saw near the pool table and attempted to start a conversation. Before they could talk, her friends dragged her onto the dance floor. Not wanting to be left behind, Benji followed and eventually found himself among Staples and his crew, blending into the group dance. They all laughed and enjoyed the dance. The next morning, the community started the day with Lord Kitchener announcing the beginning of the day. Taking him outside, Staples revealed the harsh truth about their community. The government was deliberately cutting off resources, trying to force them out of the kitchen. The government wants the land that the kitchen is on. He explained that the gang had decided to fight back and extended an invitation for Benji to join them. Without hesitation, Benji told him he would join them. After this, they grabbed their bikes and rode off together. Meanwhile, Izi woke up in an unfamiliar place, only to find a little girl staring at him. It was Jace's daughter. He greeted her, and as they were staring at each other, Jace walked in. She asked who the guy is, and Jess told her it was Uncle Izi. Later, Benji spent time with Ruby, the girl from the night before. Just as they were about to kiss, Izi showed up and asked what was going on. Ruby walked away, and Benji cursed under his breath. Then Benji and Izi stopped by Staples' place to drop off the bike before heading to a diner. Benji barely spoke, and when Izi asked what was wrong, he brushed it off. Sensing the tension, Izi told him he could retrieve his bike. Benji sat there in silence. Izi then warned him that if something went wrong, the gang would abandon him. Izi then told him that while he was his age, he didn't even know his mother. This is the real world and no one would be there for him. Feeling abandoned again, Benji asked if he wanted him to leave his place. Izi asked if he wanted to leave, but Benji is hesitant. Izi then told him to eat his breakfast, and Benji picked up his fork to do so. That night, back at Izzy's place, Benji put a picture on the wall, and they started cleaning. They worked together to set up a sleeping space for Benji, making the room more livable. After, they sat talking about the changes they made. They even chose a new haircut for Benji, but Benji refused all of them. The barber rushed him to choose because he had clients waiting for him. Benji refused to get the haircuts. Over time, Benji and Izzy got close and started to spend more time together. Benji also meets with the gang and Ruby. Once again, as he and Ruby were about to kiss, a firework interrupted them. Benji settled in, turning Izzy's place into his new home. As they brushed their teeth standing by the mirror, they banter each other playfully. One day, Izzy made his way to finalize the purchase of his new home, intending to change it from a single occupancy unit to a double. As the building's AI requested confirmation, he hesitated, uncertainty creeping in. He stood and finally replied he wanted to change it to double occupancy. The AI asked for confirmation repeatedly, telling him he must let go of the single occupancy request he made if he chose the single one. This made Izzy unsure of his decision and stands there without responding. At Life After Life, Benji sat quietly beside the plant that had grown from his mother's remains. Speaking softly to it, he tried to find comfort in her absence. He told her that he is now living with Izzy. He then sat with Izzy and admitted that he missed her. Izzy, caught up with work responsibilities, told him to wait outside. Hearing this, Benji got up and walked away. Izzy approached Tony's plants and looked at them. He then went to Benji and told him they should leave. Benji called from behind and asked where the tree would eventually be planted, but Izzy had no answer. Benji persisted with the question, but Izzy told him if he didn't have money in this world, he will get tossed out of nowhere. That night, back in the house, they both got in their beds to sleep. Benji brought up Buena Vida, hinting that even though he couldn't contribute financially, he could help out with chores. Izi cut him off, unwilling to discuss it. He told him to stop talking and sleep. Undeterred, Benji shared something his mother had once told him, that Izi worked at Life After Life and lived in the kitchen. She had hoped that even if Izi never loved her, he might one day care about Benji. Izi said nothing, and Benji called him to get an answer. Instead, Izi turned off the light and went to bed in silence. The next morning, over breakfast, Benji noticed Izi was not eating. He asked why he was not eating, and Izi told him that he didn't want to. Izi then mentioned that he had an errand to run and left the diner. Benji waited, expecting him to return, but he never did. Hours passed, and frustration turned to anger. Benji went home and tossed a can in anger. Meanwhile, Izi arrived at the luxury apartment he had purchased, leaving Benji behind without a word. He got in and the AI welcomed him. He walked to the window and saw a firework across. He stands there looking at it in silence. That day, Lord Kitchener is doing his usual radio transmission while the other community members are going on about their day. Suddenly, another police raid descended upon the kitchen. Panic spread as residents rushed to their homes, hoping to avoid the brutality. Benji watched everything from the window. Ruby, caught in the chaos, witnessed her mother being tased and dragged away by officers. Terrified, she ran to Benji's door and started banging on the door. Benji opened the shatter to see who it was, and when he saw it was Ruby, he opened the door to let her in. At the same time, Lord Kitchener was captured. His screams echoed through the PR system as the police beat him, a grim warning for all to hear. That night, the community gathered, lighting fires in his memory. Ruby and Benji stood by the window, sadness consuming them. Ruby reached out to Benji's hand, and they stood holding hands. Meanwhile, Izi sat alone in his pristine new apartment, consumed by regret. He lit up a cigarette to smoke and walked to the window using a remote to switch between views, but nothing satisfied him. Back in the kitchen, Benji stepped into the ruins left behind by the raid. The air was thick with grief as families packed up, preparing to leave after everything they had endured. Among the crowd, Staples and his gang stood watching, taking in the scene as the kitchen slowly crumbled around them. Reflecting on his choices, Izi woke up to the AI alerting him. He brushed his teeth and got ready to go to work. While there, he made his way to the chapel at Life After Life, where a funeral was being held for Lord Kitchener. He stood in quiet contemplation as mourners sang a solemn spiritual hymn. Without a word, he stood there and paid his respects. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Benji and the gang were gearing up for action. Their spirits are shattered after what happened to their community. Staples approached Benji and told him they would do what had been done to them. Seated on their bikes, they listened as Staples spoke with conviction, declaring that those who inflicted harm deserved the same in return. He called for revenge, framing it as war. The gang revved their engines in unison before taking off into the night, ready for destruction. Their first stop was an affluent neighborhood where they shattered windows, kicked in doors, and stole anything of value. They fled before the authorities could respond, only to strike another compound next. This time, resistance was met with violence. Anyone who stood in their way was beaten, homes were wrecked, and possessions stripped away. Benji, Staples, and the others got into a family house. Staples warned them to sit in silence, and the family, scared of the repercussions, sat looking at their house getting destroyed by the gang. Amid the chaos, Benji hesitated, unease settling in. Overwhelmed, he broke away from the group and rode back to the kitchen, collapsing into sleep as soon as he arrived. When he woke, he found Izi had returned. But the relief he might have felt was replaced by anger. He told Izi to leave, but Izi walked towards him. He then sat next to Benji. Refusing to speak, Benji got up to leave, but Izi blocked his path. Tension thickened between them. Frustrated, Benji shoved Izi, but Izi remained still, tears welling in his eyes. He apologized, but Benji didn't want to hear it. He told him he must leave repeatedly, but Izi was persistent. Finally, Benji's anger faded into sorrow as he sat on the bed, finally letting his emotions surface. Sitting beside him, Izi handed Benji his mother's plants. Shocked and grateful, Benji whispered a quiet thank you and took the plant. Izi suggested they find a place to plant it, and together they carried it to the kitchen's garden, settling it into the soil. Just as they finished, the clang of pots rang through the air. It was a warning signal that the police were coming. Without hesitation, they ran to hide, but in the hallway, officers spotted them. A struggle broke out, and Izi managed to fight off one officer, yanking Benji back into their home and locking the door behind them. Outside, Staples and his crew had already set their trap. A white van blocked the officers' escape, while the gang sealed off the exit behind them. With nowhere to run, the police raised their shields as rocks and debris rained down on them. Perched on top of the van, Staples watched, satisfied by the attack against the police. The battle for the kitchen had begun. From above, Benji and Izi stood in silence, watching the chaos unfold below. The clash between the gang and the police raged on, but in that moment, Benji's focus shifted. Turning to Izi, he asked the question that had been weighing on him. He asked if Izi is his father. Izi met his gaze, hesitating for only a second before giving a small nod. Instead of answering outright, he asked Benji if he wanted him to be his father. After a brief pause, Benji told him that they would see how it would go. Before either could say more, a violent pounding shook their door. The police were outside, trying to break in. Izi pulled Benji close and hugged him to reassure him that it would be okay. Izi turned to look at the door, and at that moment, the door burst open. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our recap. Like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.